Hello, my name is Gladys, and I'm a content designer based in Paris, France. My presentation is going to be about inclusive design with a focus in language. In May 2020, this man was murdered by the police. His name is George Floyd. It's really, what happened is really important because it really changed the impact of this murder, really changed a lot of things within the community and more precisely within the content design community. Because a lot of people try to ask themselves, what is our impact with design when it comes to systemic racism and more broadly to inclusion? And so a lot of groups were formed and a lot of people within these communities started wondering, do we have an impact? What do we do? What do we need to change? How do we need to approach this topic? And what I'm going to show you today is pretty much some of the approach and some of the conclusion. But as you all know, we don't have the answer for everything. It's a work in progress, but at least I hope it's going to help you start thinking about including all of your users within your projects, and also maybe change the way you work and interact with your user and also with your colleagues. So I'm sharing this quote from Lisa Feldman Barrett. She's a psychologist and neuroscientist. And because one of my focus is words, I wanted to understand the impact of words. And what she says is a hateful word may cause your brain to flood your bloodstream with hormones, squandering resources from your body budget. So each time you are impacted by a word that is hateful, or um, what can I use as a word? Each time you have a microaggression, it's going to impact you and the budget you have within your body. And so being inclusive is being fair, at least trying to be fair. And inclusive language is about caring. And the contrary of inclusive language is exclusive, but also alienating language. What she also says is the power of word is not a metaphor, it's in our brain wiring. So really, even just sharing something positive with people or making sure they feel comfortable when they use the experience you create is going to have a good impact on people and the way they feel and their desire to continue the experience with you or with another company, business, or product. And so the main idea is to try changing our mindset. And so here I focus on copy, so writing good micro copies or copies. But in fact, it's all about creating good design, from creating conscious design or conscious writing. And here, what we need to make sure we understand that we have a lot of things to learn and a lot of things to change and unlearn, impact. Because, when we discuss inclusive design, it's all about trauma. It's about, I mentioned the word microaggression, but you will see that for some of the people, underprivileged people, they need to live with trauma every day, all day, whether you have a transgender person or a black person or any type of people with disability or any people who have to face microaggression daily. It's all about trauma. So it's a different perspective of research and engaging with people and creating product too. What I hear sometimes is nothing is biased in my design, or in my words, in my product. It's definitely a misconception. Just because neutrality and objectivity do not exist, nothing is neutral. Everything is all about people experience, and nobody has the same experience. a group of people can, but you will never reach. I mean, there is no universal experience. And just to make my point, I want to show you that. So it was an article. It's in French, but it's more about the picture than the text. So if you look at the picture, you can see it's all white men, and the subject of this article was to show the French startup ecosystem and show what the future of the ecosystem are supposed to be. And I can ask you this question: what do you see? Like I said, all white men, etc. And what was interesting is that on social media, a group of people said, "Oh, this is not inclusive; it's only men." And of course, there are other people within the community. And so a week later, this group decided to do better than that, and I'm going to show you what they did. And I can ask you the question, what do you see? And I'm sure you have plenty of things to do. My point is here is not to say that they did bad or anything. My point is just to show you that we all have a perspective of what inclusion means. So for a group of women, it will be women. Maybe for other group, it will be people who look like them. But if you really want to be inclusive, you need to make sure you exclude no one and you replicate no other exclusion by trying to be a little bit more inclusive. So here they could have done many things, but they could have done better than the other group. They did not. Voila. But so I always hear, I never meant any harm, or it was not my intent, or I'm not. You can share, you can say validist or racist or ableist, etc. I mean, everything works here. The point is not about focusing on you or the people who create those products. And so the intent, because of course it's not your intent, and your intent should be to be more inclusive if this is what you decide to do. But what I always say is intent is about the people who do or create or do the thing. Impact is about the people who receive, and impact is your user focused metric. This is what you want to measure. You don't want to measure intent, you want to measure the impact of your design or your creation and the way people live with your product and the impact it's going to have at the end of the day, or when they use the product. And one of the answer is intersectionality. So I'm going to show you one video to explain what the concept is all about.
What is intersectionality? Intersectionality is a way of understanding social relations by examining intersecting forms of discrimination. This means acknowledging that social systems are complicated and that many forms of oppression, like racism, sexism, and ageism, might be present and active at the same time in a person's life. Everyday approaches to building equality tend to focus on one type of discrimination, for instance, sexism, and then work to address only that specific concern. But while the career of a young, white, and able-bodied woman might improve with gender equality protections, an older, Black, disabled lesbian may continue to be hampered by racism, ageism, ableism, and homophobia in the workplace. Intersectionality is about understanding and addressing all potential roadblocks to an individual or group's well-being. But it's not as simple as just adding up oppressions and addressing each one individually. Racism, sexism, and ableism exist on their own, but when combined, they compound and transform the experience of oppression. Intersectionality acknowledges that unique oppressions exist, but is also dedicated to understanding how they change in combination. The roots of intersectionality lie within the Black feminist movement, with legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw originating the term. Crenshaw felt that anti-racist and feminist movements were both overlooking the unique challenges faced by Black women. She stated that legislation about race is framed to protect black men, and legislation about sexism is understood to protect white women. So simply combining racism and sexism together does not therefore protect black women. Intersectional theory is now...
I'm going to stop this video here. And show you that it's one of the ways to interpret what intersectionalism is. So at the top you see a lot of privilege, and at the bottom you see example of oppressions. So for example, if you are, let's say, young, old people will be discriminated. If I take language, for example, I speak English, but other people are going to be native, but a lot of people don't speak English. I'm French. A lot of people in France and in other countries will not speak English. So just speaking the language is a kind of privilege. So what I want you to be aware of is that we all have privileges, but a lot of people also have oppressions. And we need to consider that when as a person, but also as designers. And what is also interesting is to start looking at who is within your team, and do you tend as a group to discriminate people too? At least to have privilege, and then it means you will tend to exclude a type of person who are not represented in the group you're in. So it's an interesting tool to look at who you need to focus a little bit more on, and just being part of a group, like just me being, for example, a woman and a black woman, I know that I don't represent all the women and not all the black women. So we need to make sure we don't replicate biases anyway, but it's still good to consider where you stand. We need to do a little bit more research on, and as a person and as a group. This is another way to explain the same idea. Where do you stand in terms of identity and the people you create for, in terms of circumstances like ability, geography, language, and behavior? Where do you live? What is your context? Internet connection, or how do you feel? Are you neurodiverse, for example? It's a lot of things we can consider and try to be a little bit better when we work when we try to create product for them. Yes. And so to finish this first part, the idea is definitely to be a lot more curious and try to learn about people who don't look like you don't know anything about. So you can look for design for cognitive biases is super interesting about biases, but you can learn more about transgender people, intersex people, people with disability, the Black community, women, if you're a man. And definitely it's all about trying to learn about different groups and try to just being more knowledgeable. And also, like, learning is good, but you will see research and testing is gonna be key also in the work we do. So my second part is about trying to become a better ally. And another misconception is it doesn't matter. It concerns a minority of users, and I'm going to show you why this type of misconception is problematic when you create product. The first point is to start thinking about your persona and try to have more inclusive persona. If your persona are more diverse, like if you take into consideration people with disability, you can have you can use different disability. Like I mentioned neurodiversity, you can have someone who will be a person who will be blind, or other specificities. It will definitely help. Having people who are not white is going to be also super not only interesting but impactful for your product and for other people experiences. And I'm going to show you a few examples of what being inclusive by design means. So here it's Decker. I don't know if I spell it correctly, but they have done a few videos and trainings, and they try to create. I mean, they in the work they do, they have all this discussion about being inclusive and creating other personas. So you have your average persona, but what will your experience will look like if you took into consideration people getting older, or people with disability, or people under stress. And stress is definitely something that we need to consider a lot. But also people using different device, and like you have seen in one of the slide before, you can also think about people who cannot use a Mac or the last devices. What can you offer them? This is definitely a few key questions. Here is an example from Google. A few years ago, they decided to test a new feature on. Um, they only tested it with people using iPhones, and the idea was to add for Google Maps was to add the calories. And in I think this is my guess, but I believe what they wanted to do is invite people to walk more. And so showing calories and cupcakes, the equivalent as cupcakes, was for them a good idea. And in fact, they realized it was not a super good idea. So if you look on social media, you had a lot of people discussing people with eating disorders, because when you see a cupcake and the equivalent, for some people, it could be triggering and problematic. So Google Maps now include calories estimates, and I really don't need this. And they felt that it was a judgment. I've done a little bit of research, and if I use City Mapper, for example, in Paris, and I've seen that they have calories, and it's not only about putting the calories, but also the cupcakes and the equivalent. I think that was the part that is problematic, because nobody complained about City Mapper, for example. But having this cupcake can be triggering problematic. At least it's understandable. So the cupcake feature might seem insignificant and silly, but it's really not, especially for those who are already dealing with an eating disorder. Because yes, it's not, when you use Google Maps, you just want to go from A to Z. I mean, just walk your way and go somewhere. You don't want to know if I mean, it's not a gym application, or yes, it's not a sport application. So what is the use case of the product? Is it really aligned with what you are supposed to do and what people really need? Another example is it was on Twitter, and someone said, so coding a drag queen analytical. So I don't know if I spell it correctly still. Send me the worst gender selection forms you have seen. And so this topic is going to be about gender. And so you can see, I mean, in this thread you had so many bad example that was really, I mean, at least interesting, because you can say, okay, what is my experience? Do I consider transgender people, non-binary people? What do I do within my product? Are we consider this topic? This is question, maybe you have already done something, maybe not, but this is an important question if you want to, I mean, because we need to include non-binary and transgender people within our experiences. Up. This is the example of Facebook and what they have done. They have done it correctly today, but it was a long way until because the transgender people really complain, saying everybody uses Facebook, a lot of people at least, but they don't consider transgender people. So after a lot of complaint, they decided to create another experience, and today this is what it looks like. So you can choose your pronouns, and in English you have a lot of pronouns, so you can choose it, and all your experience is going to be different based on the pronoun you decided to use. And I really like this tweet from Querian Lannister. Um, so this morning, my gynecologist introduced herself by telling me her pronouns and asking me mine. And when getting my medical history asked if I had sex with sperm producing partner. And so this is the future liberals want. Just another example. It's a super interesting one from Pinterest. So they realize that people who are making research about suicide, mutilation, scarification, and so they decided to give an answer to that problem, not making that problem on the side, but really taking care of it. So what they did, they started by changing their FAQ with and suggesting an answer. So this is in the FAQ when you make that type of research, but then now you have, like, if you do it, they're gonna ask you if they can help you and suggest an association that can help you with that. And they also work for this specific feature. They work with a psychologist at Stanford to create exercise you can do to feel a lot better. I mean, they were using things that psychologists use all the time with their patients, but they tried to do it online for this product. So this feature, because it's not really a product. It's something you can have if you need to. So if you are in Europe or in the US, wherever you are, you can try it. You won't have this feature except if you're in the US, but for the other ones, you will get them and get the local contact if you need to talk to someone. Then I can show you a few examples of what racism means in product. So everybody, a lot of people have heard about that, like master slave, and a lot of words that were racist word in product and in codes. But you could also, like, a few years ago, so it was in 2018, if you wrote gorilla in Google image, you will see a black couple, which is problematic. So we have to deal a lot with algorithm, and a lot of algorithm are biased just because it's people's data, and they need to be, I mean, there are a lot of discussion about what type of data do you want to use for your product, and how, and what do you need to do to make sure they are not biased. But it impacts our experiences too. Another example, we ask a lot of data, and most of the time it's in forms. And so Mallory, you put that in on Twitter a few months ago. So she said that when she tried to put her name in the form, they said a name should be at least 3 characters long. Her name is you, so it's not 3 characters long. And so here is her answer when she said that it was racist. People say, "Oh, it's not unintentional." Sorry for my English today. And so she said the original code was racist by not recognizing valid names, many of which are non-Western. Given our global interconnectedness, that's unacceptably racist. And definitely, this is a super interesting question. I know that some people have created a list of names you can use to make tests and make sure that um, whatever I mean, if you don't have like the if you're not called Williams or Dupont in France, it still work, and you can try with tildes, a lot of signs that sometimes don't work, but are used in other countries or other regions. Um, My last part will be about how do we design for and with all, because doing inclusive design, it's not only about how do I design things, but how do I design it differently? How do I consider other perspective in my design? And the most dangerous phrase in our language is "we have always done it this way." I love this quote from Grace Hopper because if you want to do inclusive design by designing as you have always designed, you're not going to change anything. You will still design with bias by default. And definitely, this is what we need to change our mindset, being exclusive by default from being inclusive by default, and making sure everyone is welcome in the experience we create. So the first part is going to be about the discovery process. How do you make research? Have you included underrepresented groups within your research? Who are your experts? It's also about auditing your content and making sure the words you use are inclusive. uh, when you do market research too, make sure you also check for inclusion. What are the people doing for specific research? What are other fields doing when to make sure they include people? And we have a lot to learn from other fields. And what I'm writing here is society evolves and works too. The vocabulary change, society is changing, and this is some things we need to consider also when we design. A few examples from the last few months here. Um, One of my question, I'm not from the US, but one of the question I asked myself was why do black people are called African American? And I wanted to see if that categorization was why was speaking people called this way, because the way you call people in the product definitely has an impact. And also, if I take a form, I remember it was a few months ago. I had to complete a form at the end of an event, and they asked me, "Are you African American?" Or I had tons of options, and I said, "I'm not African American," but that was the only option I had, so I clicked that. So definitely, the result is wrong because you can be black and not African American. But that's an example. The New York Times, for example, decided to capitalize the word black, but you have tons of rules you can use, like LGBT inclusive language guide. A lot of organizations have done the work before us, and we can use the work they have done to go. I mean, to learn from their knowledge and the thing they do. I really love this guide, a progressive style guide with tons of examples we can use in design and in writing and emails and a lot of things. So the discovery is going to be key. Who is included, who is excluded, but also how do we ideate? How do you prototype? Can you include people within your company or sometimes users who can provide different perspective in the design process? The way you test is also going to be key. And I'm going to show you an example just after that slide. When I mention being intentional is also about testing, because you can have inclusive persona and still and if you don't test, you will continue having a lot of problem. And evaluate. How can you evaluate the way? I mean, if inclusive design is having the impact you're trying to, I mean, you want to have. So revise your metric, work on your guidelines, and there are tons of things we can do. I want to show this example because each time I give that example, but I never show it for real. So sometimes it happened that I go to public bathroom and I want to wash my hands, and here it's gonna be about soap, soap dispenser, but it's the same with washing your hand. I mean, at least mine, as a Black woman. And sometimes you will see it doesn't work, and I show you why.
Futurism. Entering the future.
Nice. Okay, Noel, you try now. Come to your hand. Two black.
Two black.
Yeah.
So what I'll
Come
do?
again. Come again, Sashi.
Whoa.
Two back over me.
What I'll do? They get.
What you have to do?
That's how ritualist thing is.
Yeah.
I have to use that piece of white. Let's say napkin. Sure again.
Again. Bring up again.
Napkin again.
The point here is mostly to say, think about the impact of your product. So it's not only about trying to be intentional and using the right words, but definitely test, because you will see just, I mean, your sensor can be problematic. And if you don't, if it's not put the right way, sorry, I miss my word right now, but if it's not, if you did not test and you don't see that the color of the skin can be problematic, and it has been the case with watch using sensor and not seeing dark skin, but also people with tattoos. So, and just make sure you test your product and you see the impact of your product on different type of people, different skin, different experiences. Yeah. As a content designer, definitely updating our guidelines are going to be key and useful for everyone within the team. Guidelines, but when I say guidelines, it's also about the vocabulary you use within the product and within your community. So I have two good examples. In Tweet, they have done, they have updated them a few months ago. So to make sure people don't use words that harm within their team, but also in their product. So they have created this documentation to make sure people consider every type of experience. So people with disability, women and gender issues, but also other background, origins, color. Google has done the same, and today you have a lot more people who have done this work. So Adobe has done it, and other ones. So it's even more easier to start finding good example of what we can do and use in the product. So when I say in the product, it's of course what people see, but also in the code. And so what we need to do is change the way we do things, transform the way we build product, we create product, and definitely change our vision. And I really love this quote from Jonathan Coleman. It was in a Slack group. He said, in case anyone is struggling with this, I want to say that changing language is hard. Like I said, it's not only about language, but it's also about just designing for other people. Sometimes we mess up. And even when we try hard, sometimes we do, but at least we learn. And so what he says, I find myself consistently referring to our master design system files and component, only to immediately go back and correct myself to say our main files and component. I've done it at least twice today alone. It was a few months ago. So what you need to keep from that is we are all learning. Everybody is learning, and we make mistakes. But if we are intentional in desiring, if we really want to be inclusive, start by learning about communities, test, learn, integrate people within your process. It can be people from your company who have different experiences, but of course, users in the research, during the research phase and the testing phase. But just accept that you will make mistake. It's a work in progress, but you will learn in the process and you will create better product. Here are a few books and reference you can use, and I have a lot more reference today, but you can start with that, like Building for Everyone from Annie Jean-Baptiste, Mismatch from Kate Holmes. Cross-cultural design is a really good one. And the culture map, if you create product who are in different countries, different cultures, and one culture, I mean, cannot cover every experiences. You will learn a lot from those books. I joined this community last year. I think it was one of my best choice. Like humanity centered, you will challenge if you want to join and if you can join this community. You will learn a lot about research and inclusion and the way to include other people with different experience in your process. And I mean, it's definitely a great community to join if you're interested by this topic. I know we are going to follow up with questions right now, but if you want to see my work or keep discussing this topic, you can follow me on Google or LinkedIn. And otherwise, I'm happy to take your questions just right now.
So Gladys, first of all, thank you so much for speaking about this super important topic. I took a lot of notes, and I love some of the phrases. I think that famous Grace Hopper phrase always resonates. We've always done it this way, really being the most dangerous phrase. And it really, resonated with our team as well of Discover Together for the conference. So thanks so much, first of all, for sharing a great talk with us today. We do have a few questions, so we'll start with this one. How do we tackle inclusion when there are so many people excluded?
What is super interesting is to look at the diversity of your team and also the skills they may have. So maybe you have people at ease with, who have done the work and trainings about accessibility. So it means maybe why they will be maybe training you. You can start learning about new communities and I've shared books. I read tons of books. I do interviews with people all the time. I've taken that in my daily practice, so not daily but weekly. I try to engage with people regularly to make sure I'm aware, and I read and I research regularly. So just maybe take one group of people and start by reading. At least you know what they think about, what you need to consider, what their struggles are, and then start doing the work on your product or discussing with them. But don't ask them to teach you everything.
Absolutely, and thank you for the question. I noted down a lot of the books you called it: Design for Cognitive Bias by David Dylan Thomas, and Building for Everyone as well. A bunch of books there. I'll have to look back at the recording for the rest of them, but thanks for sharing, because a lot of great tips there. Okay, so next question: is inclusive research similar to product research, or the same maybe?
No, definitely not. When we test product, we want to know if people understand what they're supposed to do, and if they do it correctly, how long they will make their, how long the task will take. When we do inclusive research, what we want to understand is people's experiences. So it means we will deal with trauma. And trauma is something you need to be super careful about, of course. And that's why we need to do the work of understanding people and also that's when usually I say, put your research hat. And what we say, if 5 people tell you the same thing, even if it's not your experience, even if you will disagree in real life,
Yeah.
this is the moment to listen as a researcher and say, if those people keep telling me that, it means there is a reality here. And so it's a completely different perspective, and we need to be I think this is when empathy is really it's really about empathy, and be aware if maybe something is super difficult for you to listen to, maybe someone else within your team can handle that. but it's a completely different experience, and
Mm.
it's a traumatic experience. So no, it's not the same.
Okay, great, and thank you for the questions. So again, folks, just add your questions in the Q&A panel in the platform. Okay, so I think we have one more, Gladys. So any tips on recruiting for inclusivity when recruiting users for usability testing?
Okay, this is a good one because depending on where you live, you will have a little bit more struggle. For example, I'm in France, and I cannot say I want disabled people or Asian people, trans people. It's something I don't have the right to ask. So in my case, I mean, there is a way to do it, and so I work with agency, or I work with um, I will say NGO. It's not NGO, but group
Mm.
of people. I don't have the word, sorry, but so you can reach them and say, okay, we want to learn more and create inclusive products. Can we learn from you, but also test with you and
Yeah.
learn from your online experiences if it's online experiences. So there are tons of different way, but
Mm.
what is really key is because it's really sensitive data that we will manage. So the way you store the data and the way you use it can be impactful in a good or bad way for those people. So this is when it needs to be really taken care of. I mean, you need to be really careful about the data too.
Absolutely, and thank you for that question. Just one for myself, Gladys, if it's okay. Before we finished up, I was just curious about. I think you showed a tool. It was like a wheel, during your talk in terms of thinking about, who should we think about? Who do we need to focus on? Where can we find that? Is that published anywhere or?
Yes, if you type intersectionality, you will find that wheel. But if you want to know more about intersectionality,
Mhm.
Kimberly Crusoe has written a lot. She has I think she has a podcast, or you can find tons of talk. I know I'm reading a book right now about intersectional qualitative research.
Mhm.
I don't know if you see it here. Yes,
Yeah.
maybe. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, because it's a theory, but it's also a method of research. And I'm reading that right now because I really want to focus a lot more, because research
Mm.
is everything. Like with research and testing, you can mess up your research or someone's experience. So everything is going to be, I mean, it's going to be super impactful if you do your research right. So that's why I'm focusing on research right now.
That's great, and thank you for I think that's a new learning for myself anyway around intersectionality. So thank you very much,
Yeah.
and thank you so much for all the book recommendations as well. Okay, so folks, I think that's all the questions we have. Gladys, just one last thing. Is there anywhere anyone can learn more about you, contact you if they want to talk to
I'm
you
on
afterwards?
LinkedIn, on Twitter, almost everywhere, so you can reach me there. And for people speaking or reading French, I have a book coming in January about UX writing, pretty much. But I
Hmm.
have a section on inclusion and
Hmm.
accessibility, so it's for French speakers.
Yeah.
But yes, but otherwise, everywhere on social media.
Okay, great. Okay, so I think all we have left to do is say merci beaucoup, Gladys, for your time today, and yeah, hope to see you around for the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Have a good night. Have a good
See
day.
ya.
I don't know where you are,
Bye
but
bye. Au revoir.
bye. Au revoir.